This is the World of Martial Arts TV. I'm Andrew Staten, and today we are in honor of having the wonderful Andy Gibney. So first of all, as we like to sort of say, is what interested you in getting involved in martial arts?
Goes back to being a little boy and TV, really. So things like The Saint, anything with Roger Moore, really, The Persuaders, all them fights that you used to see, and was all, what do they call them? Adult fairy tales. Mine was 6 at the time, so, or 4 or around that sort of age. And I liked the fighting stuff. And then Elvis Presley fighting in movies that you might see on television. And then Kung Fu came on TV. Oh my God, what was that? That was just, it was, I mean, I'm a lover of stories, absolute lover of stories. And so I lived, as most of us on this call did, actually lived through the golden age of television, you know, where the stories were, you know, if you didn't have Jerry Anderson, Thunderbirds and Captain Scarlet, you had Randon Hopkirk and you had The Saint that we just mentioned, and then you had The Champions and all that type of stuff. And there was all this mystery about fighting. And then when I was 10, Bruce died and Enter the Dragon hit the cinemas. And I remember my mum going to see that film. And of course I was too young. But what they did do later on was they started showing little clips, which is bizarre now, but they started showing little clips on the world of sport. So Dickie Davis would be going, right, we got horse racing from Chepstow, and then they'll cut to the fight scene of fighting Sammo Hung. I'm like, this is a bit bizarre, isn't it? But anyway, so of course they showed stuff like that, and that began it. So all of those storytelling things were really what fostered my interest. My dad was a boxer in the army, so I suppose there's a little bit of genetics in there. And I come from a military family. I'm the first one about 4 generations that never went into the military. So I guess there's a bit of fighting blood in the family as well. So that was it, really.
So what was your introduction to martial arts? What did you first get into?
That was everybody, karate. I bet there isn't anybody who didn't start with karate, because you couldn't find anything else. So I just went to the local sports centre, started doing karate. Didn't know there was anything like styles. I remember someone asking me what style I did once. I was like, it was karate. I didn't know there was any difference. And I was doing seni about, I don't know, 15 years ago. As a guy came up and just spoke to me on our stand that we had that day, and he said, that summer of '73, they closed down the classes in, let's say, June, when the schools broke up. And they came back in September and had a little village hall, and they'd been getting to like 6 people. Enter the Dragon came out, I think it was the 19th of August, Enter the Dragon came out. And like 3 weeks later, they turned up and they couldn't work out what was going on that was so popular at the village hall that night. And it was 200 people had turned up that night at their classes, and everybody wanted to learn Kung Fu. And the guy said, but we don't teach Kung Fu. It'll do. And that was like that for years. And by the time I came into it in 1981, they were still doing good numbers. You know, there were still 40, I would think, in a class. But their customer service was hilarious because they didn't have any. So I went in and sat on the bench waiting for the class to start. And I waited the whole 2 hours and not a soul spoke to me in 2 hours. So I thought, I'll have to come back again then. So I went back again. It took 3 lessons before anybody spoke to me. And then someone said, do you want to come in and join? I was like, no, I like the atmosphere in this joint. You know, it's really nice. Of course I want to join you, pillar. So that was it. And I was addicted, absolutely addicted from day one. I was training 6 days a week as soon as I possibly could.
So what did you ever find out what style it was or anything?
It was Shotokan.
Yeah.
It was Shotokan. Yeah. And I was very lucky because there were a lot of decent people there, but there were 2 guys in particular. One was very traditional, a guy called Jerry Groom, who now lives in Japan, married a Japanese lady, completely disappeared into the Japanese life. And the other guy was a guy called Rob Hamilton, who was the opposite. He loved Bruce Lee. So even though they weren't doing Kung Fu, he had a projector where you could get like 8 minutes of film and stuff like that. And you get Kung Fu Monthly and stuff like all those sorts of things. And probably, I can't remember when we could get videos, probably 83 or something like that, 82, 83. And what we used to do was I was a bloke who started at the same time as me, a colour guy called Dougie Jeffries. And he used to have this Ferguson video star. He used to stick in the boot of his car. And after we trained for 2 hours, we'd go around somebody's house, plug the back of this thing in the back, and we put someone had got a cassette version, VHS, of Enter the Dragon. And I have no idea how many times we watched that. I mean, literally hundreds of times. And we would just absorb completely in the world of Bruce Lee. And we had this one time they came around to my flat. I had like a little 1-bedroom flat, and there was about 8 of us in the living room. And I was going out with a girl from the karate club by then, and she had a friend called Michaela. She walked in the room, and it was right at the beginning. The first scene was Sammo Hung, and she went, "Jesus," she said, "he's got a little bum, hasn't he?" And we all just went, "What? You can't say that about Bruce Lee." And that you know, all these little memories you have from those early days, and it was just like, Jesus. I thought, and then many years later, I watched it with Richard as well, and that was fabulous. That was like my one and only time I sat and watched the film with Richard, and he would make little comments and tell me little stories and bits and pieces like that. So honestly, I mean, apart from the stories, you know, the adult fairy tales, it was End of the Dragon started everything, you know, for me and for probably many of the people who watch this.
Yeah. So when did you sort of like Jeet Kune Do journey start, or did you start? Did you get involved with the Screamer first?
No, it was for 6 years. I would train in as many different styles as I could. I started training in Tai Chi and Feng Sao Kung Fu, and that was with 2 guys. I was like 18, 19 then, 19, and they were in their 50s, I think. So in my mind, they were about as old as you could possibly be, but they had a very, very interesting outlook on life. Like Joe, I think her name was, Jack and Joe Hargreaves, and not Hargreaves, he was one in, anyway, it doesn't matter what name. Halford, Jack and Joe Halford. He was very serious and she was very relaxed. And they had this guy called Chi Su. I don't know if you can remember who Chi Su was.
Yeah.
But Chi Su was originally. Sorry?
You were the main.
Oh, was he?
Yeah.
Well, he was an interesting fellow, wasn't he? Because he was an English guy and changed his name to Chinese. And I only ever trained with him once. But he did do this really cool Chi trick where he was on one side of the wall. Jack said, "Just stand there and you'll feel his energy." Well, what I didn't realize at the time, that's a hypnotic trance as soon as they say that. So, and he said, "You will feel the energy." And of course I did feel the energy because he'd already told me I would feel the energy.
Yeah.
So I bought into it. And I still don't quite know how he did it, but I did feel something. And we did this course and he smoked cigarettes like the whole way through the thing.
He did.
So I trained with Jack and Joe. I was doing my Shotokan, and then a really pivotal thing happened. We had a party about 18 months after I'd started training. It was one of our friends. It was her 16th birthday, and these skinheads turned up, crashed the party, and I was like, "Oh, this would be interesting then." So Debbie went with my girlfriend. She went to phone them. You know, the old phone on the wall. So she went to phone the police, and this skinhead just put his finger on top of the thing, cut her off. She said, "Don't do that." I thought, here we go. So she did it again, and he did it again. She said, "If you do that again," she was like 16 as well. "If you do that again, I'm going to hit you on the head with this receiver." And I thought, please don't do that. There's like 8 of them. So he went, and she just went, whang, just whacked him across the head. And I thought, oh, bloody hell. So I was like, put my hands out. And then this fella, Phil Vision, came downstairs. He'd been upstairs with some girl, drunk out of his head. And then I went, "Oh, Phil, oh, Phil." He was a local little tough guy, you see. "Oh, we didn't know you were here. Didn't know you were here." So they all started going out. And then the police turned up because Debbie had got sent to the police. But I thought, hang on. So I've been doing this for 18 months or so. And the 2 senior people in Shotokan were scared. I thought, well, maybe it was only Rob who's there. But anyway, one of them at least. I was very disappointed. And then I started to question straight away. Head kick.
Yeah.
I'm 5'7" and weigh 9.5 stone at this point. So I started to question the art. And I went to a Kempo class, and that was like about 9 miles away. And I turned up, and instead of white geese, I had black geese. So they're like the bad guys straight away. And they were insane. They were going up and down the room, like this. I thought, I'm doing that. That's what I want to do. They're mental. I want to be mental with them. And I was with them for about 3.5 years until a little bit internal politics. I learned a lot of interesting things. took me very far down the route of what's going on. But Phil, the guy that I mentioned earlier, we ended up sharing a house together, his house, and I rented a room off him. He had all the early Bruce Lee books, all the Dan Inosanto books, and he had Art and Philosophy, and that just, I would say that's probably one of the most influential books of my life, that book, because it had all the names in the back. Oh, I'd love to meet these names one day. Anyway, time moves on, 6 years goes on, and there was a karate, Terry Barnett article, Karate and Oriental Arts, and they were advertising their seminar with Larry Hartsell, and there was another guy. What was his name? Gary Spears.
Yes.
Remember Gary Spears?
Yeah.
Mad, mental New Zealander. He was like outdoing Jeff Thompson before Jeff Thompson was well known, and he had a series of articles in Fighting Arts International, which was by far the best magazine at the time. And he was in Liverpool. Larry was in London. I lived in Kettering. It was easier to get to London than Liverpool, and so I went to London. And that weekend changed my life, because Larry, first of all, was Larry, and that was the first time I'd ever seen any weaponry. None of the empty hand arts I'd done before had any weaponry. And at that seminar, Rick Fay was the assistant. Rick Young was there. Luminaries of the time. Nino Bernardo hosted it.
Yeah.
And Terry Barnett was also helping out. So I spoke to Terry like towards the end of the seminar. I said, do you have a class? And he said, no, but I teach privately. And he was really sweet, and he took me on as a private student, and I trained with him for about 18 months until I drove him completely around the twist, and he passed me on to Ralph Jones. And so I went down to Ralph, and in those years, I would go to every single seminar ever. I mean, through Terry, I was really lucky to have meet Dan, and Cass was with him as well in '87. Everything that they did just blew my mind. I mean, like every single thing. Just all I can remember is, I remember one technique from the seminar. It was a Salat throw. That's all I remember. But I remember it's like the Maya Angelou thing about them making you feel how they made you feel, and I just realised that this man wasn't a martial artist, he was God, because nobody else apart from God could be that good. I just couldn't believe the flow that he had and the movement that he had, how small he was, how brown the top of his head was. I couldn't believe any of it. I couldn't believe how low the ceiling was in Covent Garden. You do this and hit the ceiling. I mean, it was all completely, everything was too small. Cass Magda could barely get in the room. And on that weekend as well, Cass did like a private session with Richard Bustillo, and we went down to the basement. And because I was staying with Terry, he took me along as well. I was like this little puppy that just dragged all around everywhere, and I was like this the whole way. Look. And I remember Richard doing something to Cass. He like took off, just went like a cat in the air. I just went, and he went, shh. I went, and that was it. So that 87 was completely changed everything. And I started teaching then as well. I had a little group going, and we gradually absorbed as much Jeet Kune Do as we could, and learned the Filipino arts. And I trained with John Harvey and Bob Breen, and Pat O'Malley was involved in everything. And then this one day I turned up at Ralph Jones's house, because we trained in a garage or out in the front there, and he had a guy called Doug that I used to train with. He was like my training partner, and they had stick fighting gear on, which I'd never seen before. This is in the August of 1990, and he said, "There's a tournament in November. I think we'll compete." And I went, "Will we? Okay." And then Doug, we were out on the front there, right? This is Orpington, it's like the good life, and we were out on Ralph's driveway, hitting each other with sticks in armor, and I had no clue what to do. So I didn't realise the free-form sparring form, and no one said what it was. You just put all these padded gear on, and you started bashing the crap out of each other. And I thought, I like this. So that was fine until I think it was 2 weeks before the tournament. Ralph hit me on the little finger there, broke my finger. I was like, I'm still doing it. And then Friday before the tournament, I came down with food poisoning, which was brilliant. I was out on a run and had to hide going into a BP station. And my girlfriend at the time had to come and pick me up because my arse was stuck on the bog and I couldn't get out. It was just like, this will be interesting. felt terrible all day Saturday, competed on the Sunday, fought John Harvey. Back then the foot sweep was in, so I foot swept him. So we went to a draw. I didn't realise there were 4 rounds. No one told me that bit. And then I lost in the 4th round. So I trained for 3 months, broke my finger, had a very sore bum, and it was all over in like 5 minutes. And I thought, I want to do this again. And so I became involved in the stick fighting world. And I was fortunate enough to be picked for the British team in '92. And because I became involved with that, it started to, there was lots of stuff, because your information about Jeet Kune Do then was very much, if you didn't go to seminars, you were lucky enough that Vunak had brought the videotapes out, and we gobbled them up as quickly as we could. Tony Blair was doing really interesting things as well. And then we were experimenting all the time. We were just doing our best. You know, I mean, I saw everybody. If they came over, I was there. Unfortunately, I trained with every bloody ninja in the country as well. But other than that, I was always on my own. And unless we went to Edinburgh, and there was like 6 or 7 of us, and we'd all be giggling in the corner like naughty children, and people just look at us like that. But if I would go on my own. Well, I'm going. And there he would, whoever he was, if he had tabby boots on, that bastard walked his way over towards me. And that was that. So I found all the ninjas. But in the meantime, I found everything else as well. And
How did you who did you go under to get your instructorship for Jeet Kune Do, or sort of like something?
It was Richard. Originally, I was going to go under Dan, but I upset the apple cart with some things that I said in my youthful stupidity, and then I met Richard in 1990. John Carrigan and Martin Hill brought him over, Martin Sterling as we came, and I met him in Nottingham, and he was such a relaxed guy. Although I knew he had the reputation of being a tough guy, he was a nice fellow as well. He had, I mean, I met him when he was 48. He died when he was 75. So I was with him for a long time. And I was the only one making notes. And he noticed that. So I was there for 2 evenings, and I was writing all my notes down. And I used to call me the scribe, because I was always writing notes. But lots of those people are now gone, and I'm still here, still writing notes. And so Richard impressed me massively. Still training with lots of other people, but I asked Richard how that would be if I was to be an instructor under him, and he said, well, we'll see how it goes. And we did see how it goes. And then I was heavily involved in the stick fighting world, got involved in the politics of it, and there was a bit of a fallout and silliness that went on around '96. But in '96, the World Championships were in Los Angeles. So I went to the IMB for the first time there. And me and Mark Hayes and Anne Marie, who was my girlfriend at the time, we all went to the classes, and we did our morning training for the tournament. Then we did the classes. And then the tournament was, I can't remember how long we were there for, 10 days maybe. We did the weekend. And then on the Monday morning, I mean, we were partying until like 4 in the morning. We did really well. I mean, there's something that will enliven your household. My girlfriend became world champion, and I got a silver medal. Oh, that went down pretty good. And so we're not together anymore. And I knew there was a 9 o'clock class. So even though we've been out partying, I made sure I was at that 9 o'clock class. Turned up, Richard said, what are you doing now? I said, I've come for the class. He went, no. He said, our instructor camp is on now. I went, I didn't know that. He looked at me like this. Give me your $10, get in there, go on, off you go. They gave me $10. It was Kakoi teaching. And I'd met Kakoi in '92, and I'd seen him do demos at stuff, but I'd never trained with him. So I had the morning where I could just do the morning part. And he was incredible. He was absolutely amazing. And I was very, honoured. And then I said to Richard, pretty much as I was leaving, who brings you over to the UK now? He said, no one. And Martin had moved on to different things. I said, can I? He said, if you can pay the fee. So he told me what the fee was. And I went, oh, okay. That's a lot of money. So, and then I started bringing him over in '97. I had hosted him in '91. We did a seminar in Wellingborough. But I brought him over every year and then until he passed. And gradually inveigled my way. In fact, when I got my apprenticeship, my apprentice certificate, that was a very strange weekend. That was the first weekend I brought him over. Did you ask me a question? You want to carry on?
Yeah, no, you tell us about the apprenticeship. That's good, and then I'll chop in a minute. Go on.
So the apprenticeship was, see, now there was a physical exam you have to do. But what I never realised with Richard is Richard took people as a generic. He wanted to know who you were as a person, not your martial arts skills. He sort of took that as a given. He's just seen me in the world championships. He'd seen me at seminars. He thought he's got a bit of skill. He's all right. What's he like as a person? So when he came over, he came to the house. He had dinner with Anne-Marie and the boys, and we had dinner together, and we had dinner at different places as well. And he was odd with me. He'd always been the same every time, always very relaxed. But this time he was odd, and I couldn't work out why he was odd. And then we did the seminar. We had, like, I don't know, 80 people. So we covered the costs and everything else. I paid him. And then we went back to London. We always went back to London on a Sunday night. He'd catch the early flight home. We got to the hotel and he said, "Do you want to have a drink?" I said, "Yeah, all right then." So you know, we have a coffee, or I don't know what we had, I can't remember. He sat me down and he changed completely. He went back to being Richard again. I was like, what's going on here then? And I realised after he'd gone that he'd spent the whole weekend sussing me out, because if I was going to look after his concerns in England, he wanted to know I was trustworthy. He wanted to know what my family life was like. You know, was I going to try and stitch him up? Blah, blah, blah. He was judging me the whole way through. And then the following year, he issued my certificate, and I was the first one to get the apprenticeship. And then people like John and Lee Bander and people like that, they all followed on, and we built a group. But that's how he was. He wasn't just interested in you as a martial artist. He wanted to know about your soul. That's what Richard was like.
Mm-hmm. Just so that gives it. I mean, I've done a little bit, but when you were at the IMB, tell us what it was like working, having a training session with Richard. Just kind of give a sort of like in a nutshell, what the energy was like, or what you felt at that time. Did you have to nip yourself, look, whatever? What did you feel?
No, first of all, it's always bloody hard. I've been in February, I've been in June, been in the summer. It's always hot. So that was the first thing, just training wise hot all the time. Very relaxed. Like, the whole place is relaxed. Everybody's friendly. We went to the Inosanto place one night during the '96 event, and that was very pleasant, but it's a very different atmosphere, completely different. Whether it's just because it was instructors there, I don't know. But when you went into you go to it's changed now, they've moved location. But when we went into the one in Torrance, you go into reception, it's bloody great big picture of Bruce Lee on the wall, sofa that's looked like it's been sat on by 1,000 people a day. Excuse me. The reception area, and there's the man right behind the reception. He's like, this is his home. This is Richard. Then you go in the training room, massive training room, huge. We've got one of the massive Bruce Lee bags in the corner, then you've got a whole load of bags, pictures all over the wall. When you go to Dan's place, all the pictures are how they should be. IMB, wonky, boing, over there, out of date. This one's a new one. Everything was higgledy-piggledy. You go on the mats, everybody's lovely. And most people, not everybody, but most people were really skilled. That was the point, really. And no one took the piss. Everybody wanted you to enjoy your session. So that was on the main training room. Then you had a weights room where Richard had Bruce Lee's hand gripper, boom, boom, on the floor, like there. Anybody could just have a go. No museum or anything like that. Like, that's Bruce Lee used to use that. He did. Oh, okay. And then he'd had his dummy in the corner that was in bits because it had fallen apart. He put it back together eventually. And then he had the ring room as well. And so there was a little bit of, I can't believe I'm here, but I can believe I'm here. But every time you went there, other than the last time when I went there and he passed, it was always such a joyful experience. And when I went the last time, he'd passed away about 10 days before, and it was a Memorial weekend. That was very strange, because you're going to a place where you've always gone to meet Richard, but now Richard isn't at home anymore. But then I met Steve De La Cruz, who's taken over IMB, young man now in his 30s, and lovely fellow. We've got him coming here in 3 weeks, and you know, he does the IMB conference with me and Mo, and we have a great time. So yeah, that was it. It was just so welcoming, really.
Yeah.
But just so bloody hot.
You explained some of this in one of your books, Punching Above Your Height. Can you tell us a little bit why you wanted to do that book and what was that about, and is it still available? You know,
it is. Got some. It needs a reprint, to be honest. There are a couple. You can buy it online. It's on Amazon online. Why did I write it? That was funny. I was teaching. I had one of my girls coming up for a black belt. I was telling her the stories that she should know, and she said, just me and her. We did a private lesson. She said, you should write these down because one day you won't be here. Thanks. So that was it, really. That was, well, I suppose she's got a point, actually. And like I said, I love telling stories. I love receiving stories. And I thought that there would be, and no one had written a history of UK Jeet Kune Do, really. So I thought, well, if I put in my perspective, I'll be first for a start. And also, lots of things should be told, you know, like how Bob Breen got into Eskrima, for example. Ralph Jones told me that story. He said that Bob had obviously started his evolution, and then one day this guy came to fix a telephone in his house, but for BT, and they were just talking, just putting a phone in the corner, and Bob's, I don't know how they got onto it. It turned out it was Jay Dobrin, who was one of the early Rennie Latosa students. So because of a guy fixing a phone in Bob's house, Bob now had a place to go and train Eskrima with Brian Jones, which he went with Ralph Jones, and then that started the Eskrima thing off. But how did that happen? Or why did Rennie Latosa, how did he become the first person to teach Eskrima in this country? Well, he was an American Air Force guy. He went to Brian Jones's Wing Chun class, and he was big for Filipino Latosa, and they were interested. And obviously, you can always tell when people, the way people move. Oh, what do you do? He said, I did a little bit of Eskrima, but they hadn't heard of Eskrima. So they said, well, can you show us a little bit of Eskrima? Yeah, sure, no problem. So that was that. So Rennie started teaching, you know, the Cinque Terre system, and Brian was his main guy, and Bill Newman. They were partners for a while. They had a bit of a falling out. Bill went over to Germany, made loads of money with Kurt Kernspecht under the Wingsun guys. Brian only ever had a small school in the Peterborough. Well, he moved up to Peterborough. And Jay Dobrin, I only met first time about 18 months ago. He's the only person I'd never met at that time. He's not a well man now. He's I think he has MND, but he's not a very well man. But a lovely guy, you know, really lovely. So I always like to know where things come from, and I like to give credit where it's due as well. But I also think it's important that we as martial artists evolve. You know, that's what the essence of Jeet Kune Do is about. You know, that the art of 1973 has less relevance in 2024 than it did in 1973. It's not to say it's not relevant, but it has less relevance. You know, because I would say, you know, we're all familiar with these things. Well, you think you know, that's a computer in your pocket now, isn't it? But the three of us, our first phone would have been a dial-up that just sat on there and just you made calls on. So we've evolved in phone technology, and I think we've evolved in martial arts technology as well. And I think that's my interest, and how martial arts has gone from an art where we used to talk about Buddhism in terms of philosophy, because that was the only thing that they had that thing to relate to, and going back to the Shaolin Temple. So now people have studied neurolinguistic programming. I think I was one of the early people, adopters of those sorts of philosophies. I wanted to understand more, so I trained with Richard Bandler and Paul McKenna and Tony Robbins and a really cool guy called Marshall Rosenberg. And I started to understand that the ideas of communication. That made me a better teacher. Then it helped me to understand stuff. And in the last couple of years, the way I teach now is I break it down into 4 areas. I have the mind, stand-up fighting, groundwork, and weaponry, and they're the 4 areas that I work on. And a couple of years ago, I used to think, why do people train? Because I can remember being at Dan Inosanto seminar thinking, why am I here? I'm on my own, Billy's no mates, in Glasgow, you know, on my own, travelled up in a Ford Escort 1100, foxy car, takes, you know, you could have flown there quicker. And why am I here? It took me 3 months to work it out, and I realised that was the thing that I love the most. That's what gave me great joy. I thought, well, why do people train? My philosophy, well, my reason is that people train for 6 reasons. They train for self-defense, for sport, for fitness, for personal development, for social engagement, or history and traditions. And I just did a survey of my club members recently to find out where on the scale everybody was. And no big surprise that self-defense was number 1, but not by much. And people use it as a fitness method, not by much in terms of difference. And then just behind that was personal development. So things like stress release, things like discipline, weight loss, understanding themselves, all that type of stuff comes in. But you have to teach them history and tradition and you know, the social aspects. People love coming here. We've got a big sign in our place of welcome to your second home. You know, we want it to be a place where people love to come and want to train. And they have a feeling that when they leave there, they've come somewhere that they feel cherished and nurtured as well. And you punch them in the face, of course.
Yeah, in your journey, Andy, you've also become a bit of an author as well, haven't you? You're kind of a bit of a dark horse on the author side.
Yeah, well, I've written 5 now. I'm writing the 6th one at the moment. I'm trying to find exactly the way to go. But I ran a publishing company for 8 years as well. We published over 100 books and learned a lot about authorship. And marketing and all those sorts of things. So yeah, I've written 5. I've written The Magic Number, which was about how to live your life in 90-day cycles. So companies like Pixar and Meta and Sony and all those guys, they all do the 90-day planning. But I wanted to tell stories in that. So I told the story of Graham Aubrey, who was a world championship racing cyclist who also had severe mental health issues. I told the story of Nirvana, because if you did it more than once, more than one 90 days, you know how they did the Nevermind album. And I thought, well, if you did it for a year, who's the most successful person I could think of in a year? And that I did Elvis in 1956 and how much money he earned. It's not from the records actually, but from the merchandise. And I titled that into the first book. So I tried to write about 4 or 5 before, could never finish them. And I wrote that in 3 weeks and then delivered it at like 600 people at a business event and sold them out. So and continue with that. That made me, once you did one, you go, that's how you finish a book. So then the next book I wrote, which is a bit more contentious, was about relationships, called How to Seduce Your Wife or Anyone Else's. And I knew as soon as I had the other bit at the end of the title, that's the bit that would sell. And it's still my most popular book, still sells. Then I did Punching. Then I did a book about book publishing. And then I wrote, which is my best book, which is A Dash Between Two Dates, which was published 2 years ago. And it was about the things that help you to cope with difficult times. And it was actually Kirsty, my wife, who'd said, I call it a line between 2 dates, you know, like Richard was 1940 to 2016. It's that line in the middle. That's your life, isn't it? That's the bit. And she said, you should say dash, because that shows how fast life is. And 6 weeks after she said that, she passed away as well. So everything in that book worked, you know. So the idea of being in control of your mind, having that understanding. But what I never realized, and I now realize, is that grief will strip everything out of your life and it takes a while to recover. So the new book will be along those similar lines and about how you control the mind, control theory.
Right. You once told me that you were going to do another book to Punching Above Your Height. Did you ever consider doing that, or is it you just want to do a bigger volume?
I wrote about 50,000 words of it, but I haven't finished it.
You said at one time, I said you was going to do this Punching Above Your Height Part 2. Tell us where you're at with that, and why is it? What's happened to it? Is it going to happen, or are you not?
Kicking Below the Waist, it's called.
Oh, well, right, different one. Okay, go on.
Kicking Below the Waist. It was part written, and lots of it was about the stick fighting journey, and also about the growth of Dottie Paras and forms of screaming in this country. And I probably went down the negative route too much. I had to write it all out to get it out, but I think there's things in there that probably no one cares about. You know, 30 years later, it's pointless saying. So I will finish it at some point. It says in Punching will be out in April of, I don't know, the following year, whatever it was, 2017. Well, here we are, 7 years later, we're still waiting. It's like Game of Thrones. It's like the last book of Game of Thrones, so we're still waiting for it. Yeah, I'll look at it. And why did I not write it? because almost like the ship had sailed at that point.
Yeah.
And then Richard passed as well. And when Richard passed, because when we launched that book, that was 2016, we had that massive seminar, you know, it was packed with like 80, 90 people in a fairly big room, but we could have done with a bigger room. And then when Richard passed, you know, I thought that was grief. You know, that really rocked me. You know, Kako had died the year before. He was 95 or 96. I mean, that wasn't a surprise. And then I remember seeing there's a thing came up on, I don't know, 20 something, around about this time actually, saying that Richard was in hospital. And I thought, hang on, no, I couldn't comprehend it. It was like, but Kako just died. And I realised they weren't talking about Kako, they were talking about Richard. I was like, what's wrong with Richard? And he died 6 days after going in the hospital. So, you know, I was pretty broken up about that. I was the only person from the UK who went to the memorial. And I was really pleased that I went. A couple of others wanted to go, but then for whatever reasons, it didn't happen. And I went, and, you know, I got to speak at the memorial. I saw how upset Dan Inosanto was. It was like, I've never seen so many people at a memorial. It was like 1,000 people. It was packed. They did the haka there. I could have been part of the haka, but I thought, oh, I'll just make a tit of myself, so I won't do that. But, you know, like I said, I met Steve de la Cruz for the first time, spoke to Eric Nold. To be honest, I had a good time, for as good as you can have in those situations. It took me probably 2 years to get over the fact that Richard had gone. I brought Chris Kent over the following year. I wanted to follow. I wanted it to carry on. And the first year was fantastic. We had a great time. And the second year has nothing to do with Chris, the problem at all. I realised I was taking Chris to all the places I'd taken Richard before. So he would stay at the same hotel. We'd go to the same seminar venue. And I could feel the ghosts following me everywhere. And it was troubling me. And then we were going to do a third seminar, and then COVID hit, and then it didn't happen. And I realised during COVID, I didn't need to do that anymore. Richard always said to me that I needed to step into my space. And when you've got him as the shadow above you, I always felt he was the boss and that was it. And I thought, well, if we're going to keep his legacy going, you know, we unveiled a nice big picture of Richard in the gym. We talked about Richard a lot. But if we were going to keep it going, then we had to do something that was different. So we hosted, or I hosted, an IMB. I think the first one we just called it an IMB get together or something. Steve came over on his own, really, and we had a good time. There was always an element of sadness about it, but we had a good time. And then I decided what we needed to do is we'd done a couple of conferences back in the 2000s, early 2000s, when Richard was around, obviously, and they'd gone really well. I hadn't done one for about, I don't know, 17 years or something. So well, let's just call this the third IMB conference. So I taught, and Steve came over, and Mo Teague taught, and that went, well, it would have gone great, but Kirsty died like the week before, so that was quite difficult for me. And then we did the same thing with Kirsty. So we've now got Kirsty's Corner. We've got a big canvas in the corner. We've tied her sticks and everything else. So that was really emotional for all of us. You know, people were very respectful of me and wanted me to be able to get through. But I mean, talk about a black cloud. We're doing the IMB conference to recognise Richard has passed, and my bloody wife has just passed the week before as well. Just like, oh my God. You know, terrible, like a Shakespearean tragedy, you know. Next thing it's going to be Macbeth has turned up. Anyway, so I was like, oh my God. And then we did the fourth one. I thought, well, let's change things up a little bit. We invited Danny Goober up. And Danny is absolutely bonkers. I mean, as maddest person I probably ever met. So that was good. That was a different flavour there. And then we did one last year. It was just 3 of us. We had one other guy who just did a guest spot, and he did great. But we had our best time last year. So we felt like we'd honoured Richard, we'd evolved and moved everything forward. We pushed it. And what's great about having 3 people teach is the first person teaches and does a great class, and then the next person teaches, and like let's say I'm third. I'm thinking, shit, these 2 guys are really good. Then I better up my game a little bit. And we just do that the whole time in a competitive way, but also in a way that's bringing the energy up. Where we're looking for the jokes, we're looking for the moments, we're looking for how can we get people to think differently, how can we bring the energy up. And we just had an absolutely fantastic time last year, and everybody loved it. And we're doing well for numbers for this year as well. And that was it. We can see where the evolution is, and there's another evolution coming in next year. And I feel like now I've stepped into my world now, that unified fighting systems, the thing that I teach under, is something. So that, like I said, the 4 elements, the 6 questions, those things come together now, and I can step into, like Andy Gibney as instructor he has his place now. That's where I feel I am.
Yeah. So what do you feel is your next step? Is this your next step you're talking about, do you feel?
In terms of, well, I had a question last year. Kirsty was such an interest. I mean, she would always be there in terms of the influence she had on my life. I'd known her for 20 years. I hadn't seen her for 17 or 16 or something, and we ended up married. But she'd had a tough life. She'd been abused by some not very nice men over years, different relationships, and she had an illness called complex regional pain syndrome. So she had a lot of emotional issues, which she dealt with brilliantly. So that made me look at the world of mental health, and I started to look at statistics, and then I started thinking, so of like 18 people a day kill themselves. So it's 1 every 75 minutes. So during the time of this thing we're doing, someone will have killed themselves, and then they'll have done it again by 5 o'clock, and someone else will have done it again. I thought, well, I know a lot of stuff. I'm sure I can help people in some way. I can have a positive aspect through doing what we do through martial arts. How can we help people? So once I started to research, you go down this bloody black hole of all sorts of stuff. What is the most common age that men commit suicide? It's 45 to 54. Well, why is it that age then? And the main reason is lack of purpose. And I sort of understand that. When Kirsty passed, it took a while for me to find out what my purpose was again, find out who I was again. But it happens because long-term relationships end, or they get fired, or they feel that they're not useful in the community anymore. And so they take the path out. Okay, what else can I find out about this? So it started with that question. And then as I started to evolve, I started thinking, hang on. So lots of people who come to my classes because we help them in some way. You have a shitty day at work. Come and hit some focus minutes. It's so basic. It's unbelievable. Meet your mates. Punch a friend in the face. It's a great feeling. He punches you in the face. It's not such a great feeling, but it's a feeling. You're alive. You recognize that you're alive. Cool. That's good. Okay, I can do that. And started to look at that whole process of you go through. So the evolution is, how do I teach a system that at the moment it's called control theory, because what is the meaning of life? That's the question. What is the meaning of, just a small question, what is the meaning of life? Most people have no clue. But my take on the meaning of life is control of your mind. So when you have control of your mind, you control everything that happens within your sphere. And we are bombarded every day by messages, marketing messages. Eat this, eat that, do this, do that. These things all the time. Social media, boom, boom, boom. You want to look like that. You want to look like this. And so we have girls that have lips that are as big as a monkey's arse. We have looks. There's that woman yesterday that had the biggest cheeks in the world. She's like a bloody hamster on steroids. It's not a good look, is it? When you think when we were growing up, Raquel Welch was probably the most beautiful woman of her time. Wasn't a thing that was flawed about her. You look at and then you look at the elegance of someone like Helen Mirren, who's like in her late 70s and still looks amazing. And then you look at someone like Judi Dench, who's who's not the prettiest woman in the world. That's not the king. But her heart and her soul and her being is amazing. And you look at what is it? What did I learn from Kakoi when he was in his 70s? How did he eat? How did he conduct himself? Richard. Someone says something bad about Richard. He never said a word. Never bit. Never did let people like me get involved in the arguments. Andy, why are you doing that? So Anne-Marie used to say, when I used to get mad, you'd say, what would Richard say? So Richard wouldn't say anything. She said, the fuck are you talking about then? And I think, that's interesting, isn't it? I learned a lesson there. So that was the point. Don't get involved. You know, like, was it Churchill said, you know, if you take notice of every dog that barks, you never get anywhere. And it's that type of stuff. How do you control your mind? Okay. Then you go into all the different areas of how you control your mind. And when you have mind control, you now control your life again. The quality of your life improves, so that if you, if your weight is not under control, why? Because you're listening to marketing messages and we're being filled full of sugar and all sorts of stuff. If you are getting mad because you don't like a particular technique that you've just seen on YouTube, stop it. You're a muppet. It's got nothing to do with you. Andy Hopkins said that I have no interest in what other people's opinions are of me. It's got nothing to do with us, because you're not in control of your mind. Otherwise, you're going all over the place. You're losing your life. You know, when people say, "How can that possibly be 10 years ago?" Because you haven't taken any notice of what's been going on in your life. You've let everybody else steal your time, control your elements. That's it. How does all this come from standing in a room doing jab, cross, hook? It comes because if you look back at Martin Sterling used to say, martial arts is the oldest form of personal development. And it is absolutely true. That everything that they were doing 2,000 years ago with the little Chinese folks, they were in control. And then they not only could control their minds, they could control their bodies, they could control what was going on, that we have this awareness. Most of us never get involved in fights because we see it coming. The bad guys look for the people who are not seeing it coming. They're looking for the easy targets. As Jeff Thompson said 30 years ago, make yourself a hard target. You are not going to be involved in that. Then you can do martial arts for fun. So those 6 reasons, self-defense is your primary. It is. But if you do your personal development right, then you don't get involved in the self-defense situation because you are already in the self-protection mode, which is you don't get involved in the stupid fights.
Very, very good. I love it. I love it. I love that, Andy. That's
but perfect. The most common age now for people to die in knife fights is still teenagers. The next common age is people in their 50s.
Yeah.
And why is that? Because they take umbrage at some young scummy git having a go at them on a train and going, you can't do that, you can't do this. And they get involved and they don't have the training. So they think because they're 55, you should respect me. And an 18-year-old with a knife doesn't care. And so all of a sudden, everything escalates and one person ends up dead. And we see that on YouTube clips many, many times. But when you teach them properly, if you're going to get involved in that fight, you better be prepared. It's as simple as that. That's why I like stuff like that Kevin Costner makes, the Westerns that Kevin Costner makes. I really got a lot of time for Kevin Costner. I love Yellowstone. I love the 1883 series as well. And if you look at the way that John Wayne used to be the big hero, it was almost comedic sometimes. I'm a big fan of John Wayne, I love John Wayne. But then you see what Clint Eastwood did in the 60s and just observed first before he shot people. John Wayne would just go up, pull the gun, and that was it. He was the boss. But Eastwood was the stoic guy. Okay, let's work it out. Like in Fistful of Dollars. If I can make this person work against this person, I can make all the money. That's a really smart thing to do. And they changed the Western. But now if you look at what Costner is doing, especially with what he did with Dances with Wolves, it's brought it back to an element of reality. So you have, if you watch Yellowstone, you see the modern American Indian and what is happening there. I understand completely that it's as much a modern fairy tale as The Saint was in the 60s. But there's lessons to be learned. There's a way to carry yourself. There is a way for you to be grounded, that you're in control of your mind, therefore you're in control of your body. And it comes back to that root stuff again.
Andy, I just want to wind this up on a bit of a more lighter note. because it's absolutely fantastic what you've been sort of like revealing and stuff, and I absolutely adore it. It's fantastic stuff. But in your time of being an instructor and stuff like that, you must have had some of the most craziest questions asked you, and you're a good storyteller. So tell us at least one of the funniest things that some students come to you and said, yeah, Sifu, what should I do with, you know?
I'll tell you two stories. One night we had where it always happens in one evening, these things. So we used to have these two Indian lads. They were cousins. One was sharp and knew what he was doing, and the other one could barely tie his own shoelaces. So one was about 15 and the other one was 16 or something like that. So just move my chair because I have to do this one. So we're in a right lead. Focus mitts up like this, right lead. I said, you've got the wrong foot forward. So he was in the opposite lead. So he went, imagine you are now punching at me. So I said, you got the wrong foot forward. He went, okay. I'm like, what? Same moment, like 2 minutes later, there's a guy there. We're doing Thai kicks. He's got the pad, instead of having it down on his leg, he's got it waist height. I said, you need to put it on your leg. He tried to put his leg through the straps of the pad. He'd been in the army. No wonder people are dying. The other story, I'll tell you a story from Jeff Espinel, because Jeff Espinel has the best stories of anybody. He's a good friend of mine, lives in southern France, teaches all around the world. Used to have a club in Paris. It's a Bruce Lee story. I have to move my chair out of the way. So where Jeff, there's only like 10 guys, all tough guys. And this one particular night, this guy turned up, young fella, in a game of death catsuit. So first of all, everybody's like, this will be interesting. So Jeff's got them there like this here, and he's giving them, let's say the combination is back fist, cross hook. Just say that. I don't know what the combination was. So Jeff counts it out, okay? So you go one, and you go, bah. The whole line's there, except for the guy in the game of death suit. The whole line is like, look at Jeff. I'm sure he won't do it again. Number two. Look at him again. Third time he does it. By this time, the guy standing next to him is getting a bit annoyed. 4. Boom. Just knocked the guy clean out. Just decked him in one. They all look at the guy. They pick him up, drag him to the corner, and just stuffed him in the corner, just left him there. Funnily enough, he never came back.
Oh dear. That's absolutely wonderful. Andy, thank you so much for your interview. It's been an absolutely eye-opener and revealer, and thank you so much. We'll be coming back to you soon.
Okay.
But thank you so much, and all the best with the IMB continuing story. It's lovely to know that you're holding Richard so high and moving into your own space, which is lovely. That's the growth. So that's
what Jeet Kune Do is about, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
lovely.
I'll tell you that just so that you get the right message. I always, when I went to interview Richard once, when it was the martial arts master documentary, you love this one, and I think I might have told you before. I walked in there and he sat me in a chair and he looked. He was in his office and so. And he looks at me and says, okay, what's Jeet Kune Do? And I'm like, what? You know, and I am going to, you know, so I explained what I thought of Jeet Kune Do, and he just looked at me and went, yeah, that'll do. That'll be all right. Yeah, I'll do an interview now. But he, as you said, you know, he wouldn't, you know, he wanted to sum you up first. He wasn't going to talk to anybody stupid.
It was very intimidating. For such a lovely guy, he was very intimidating.
Yeah. He just, what's Jeet Kune Do? And I went, what? Andy, thank you very much for your time. I'll be in touch with you soon, and we'll be talking about other things. All right, then. I'll see you soon, folks.
Thank you very much. Thanks a lot, guys. Much appreciated. Take care.